All right, next up we're going to get into the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is going to consist of the cranial nerves, which are going to arise from the brain. Those will be branching up in here. The spinal nerves, which are going to arise from the spinal cords. And the ganglia, which is going to be the collection of nerve cell bodies outside of the central nervous system. Now, the cranial nerves are going to be the 12 pairs of nerves that are attached to the brain. These are going to be referred to by Roman numerals and name. So some cranial nerves contain only sensory fibers, some contain only motor fibers, and others are going to be mixed, containing both sensory and motor fibers. These nerves are primarily concerned with the head, neck, and facial regions. There is one nerve, the vagus nerve, that has branches to the neck and internal organs, but for the most part, we're going to see those cranial nerves associated with the head. Here is where, here's just sort of a breakdown of those cranial nerves. So the cranial nerves, like I said, they're named for their Roman numerals. So for example, we have the cranial nerve number 1. This is going to be branching down from the olfactory receptors. Cranial nerve 2 is from the retinas of the eyes. So take just a moment, look through some of these. I'm not going to be quizzing you over the locations of the cranial nerves or what they are responsible for. You may, however, see this again in a later class like anatomy and physiology. So spend just a little bit of time reviewing this section, but don't dwell on it or stress about it. All right, after the cranial nerves, moving down from there, we have the spinal nerves. The spinal nerves are going to emerge from either side of the spinal cord. There are 31 pairs of those spinal nerves. Now, like I said before, the posterior root contains the sensory fibers, and the ventral root contains those motor fibers. The cell bodies of the sensory neurons are going to be in the dorsal root ganglia, and the roots, the ventral root, like I said, contains those motor fibers. Those two roots are going to join together to form a spinal nerve. All of the spinal nerves are going to be thus mixed nerves because they contain both sensory neurons and motor neurons. So because they contain both those sensory neurons and those motor neurons, we're going to find that in the spinal cord we have those reflex arcs. I want to spend just a little bit more time talking about those reflex arcs. I know we mentioned them earlier, but these are going to be the sensory neurons that enter the cord and stimulate a whole bunch of interneurons that are found in the spinal cord. Some of those interneurons are going to synapse with other motor neurons. Some are going to synapse with other interneurons and carry that message all the way up until the brain, but some of those are going to respond right away with motor neurons. Those nerve signals can then travel in those motor fibers to an effector that brings about a response to that stimulus. Some of those interneurons that are involved carry those nerve signals to the brain for perception. So when we have a reflex arc, we can see, here is an example of a spinal reflex arc. We have a sensory receptor that says, ouch, that's sharp, and it sends the message to the spinal cord. The spinal cord can interact directly. We can have an interneuron that interacts directly with a motor neuron. And so the reflex can be to pull away almost even before the brain gets that message. Other interneurons will carry that message up to the brain, but that reflex arc can be processed in the spinal cord itself. All right, so we've talked about the peripheral nervous system and how the peripheral nervous system can be broken down into the autonomic nervous system. So the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system governs conscious sensation and voluntary movement, so that's all under voluntary control. The autonomic nervous system runs automatically. This is going to be responsible for our unconscious, involuntary internal activities. It's going to be responsible for regulating cardiac and smooth muscles, organs, and glands. That autonomic nervous system can be further divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. Now, those two systems are going to create opposite responses, both of which are involuntary. So all of the autonomic responses are involuntary. And it's going to innervate those internal organs. We're going to use, for both our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, we're going to use 2 neurons and 1 ganglion for each impulse. So those two systems are going to be our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system, or the sympathetic division, is going to contain most of the preganglionic fibers that arise from the middle portion of the spinal cord and terminate in ganglia that lie near the cord. So this preganglionic fiber is going to be short. That postganglionic fiber is going to be long, so it'll carry that message a long way. Now that sympathetic division is going to be responsible or active during emergency situations when you might be required to fight or take flight. So this is our fight versus flight response. It's going to be responsible for increasing the heart rate, dilating the airways, so that way we have a ready supply of glucose and oxygen. It's going to inhibit your digestive and urinary organs. And the neurotransmitters released by the postganglionic axon is going to be norepinephrine. The structure of norepinephrine is like that of epinephrine. Epinephrine is also known as adrenaline. So it's going to be producing massive amounts of that norepinephrine and adrenaline. The parasympathetic division. The parasympathetic division is going to include very few cranial nerves and fibers that arise from the bottom portion of that spine. Now, the preganglionic fiber is going to be really long. The postganglionic fiber is short. In other words, those ganglia tend to lie really close to their target organ. This is going to be responsible for promoting association with, or promotes the responses that are associated with a relaxed state. So like our rest and digest. So it's going to promote the digestion of food, slows down the heart rate. This is our rest and digest system. The neurotransmitter that's going to be used by the parasympathetic division is acetylcholine. So here is a wonderful diagram that sort of breaks down those two different systems of the autonomic nervous system. I would recommend spending just a little bit of time with this diagram, figure 14.8 or 1418, and just sort of talking through all of the different parts, all of the different things that are happening, everything that's occurring when both the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems are in control. All right, you should be able to contrast those cranial and spinal nerves, detail the fastest way for you to react to a stimulus, that reflex arc, and then you should also be able to, just as a thought problem, predict what would happen to homeostasis if the autonomic nervous system failed. So that's going to be my challenge to you for this section. All right, as always, please let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns.